Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the panel for Starcraft 2 multiplayer, put your hands together for the Starcraft 2 balance team.
Hey everybody, my name is Dustin Browder. I'm the game director on Starcraft 2. Thank you, thank you. And it's my pleasure to share the stage with some of the smartest guys I've ever worked with. This is David Kim. Give it up for David. David is the balance designer, currently working really hard for us on Starcraft 2 and Heart of the Swarm. And this is Josh Mankey, PhD and local genius. Mankey is responsible for a lot of the stats that we use in BattleNet. He's also responsible for the ladder system that we all play in every day. So here's what we're going to do here today. We're going to talk a little bit about where we're at in balance in Wings of Liberty, what we have just seen recently, what we're hoping to see for the future, give you guys a look into the numbers and into the process that we use inside Blizzard Entertainment, and then we're going to give you a look at what's going on in Heart of the Swarm, what our current plans are for Heart of the Swarm, and I think if we do our job right here, we'll have a ton of time for questions for you guys, so please get ready, and we'll hopefully have a long Q&A session where you guys can ask us anything you want to ask us about Wings of Liberty or about Heart of the Swarm. All right, let's take a quick look at global balance and where we're at right now in Wings of Liberty. So Terran versus Zerg right now, and this is across everyone in the world, all leagues, all divisions, is pretty even, within 1 or 2 percentage points in any given area of the world on any given day. Protoss versus Zerg, all over the world is very, very even for us. So we're seeing good results in these. And then the very contentious Terran versus Protoss, strangely, is actually very even. Looking at all leagues and all ladders. I know, I'll get to it. Don't worry. It's fine. But again, remember, this is bronze all the way through Grandmaster. So some of the bronze guys are getting in there, and if they're having a better experience, that's diluting the rest of the pool. So let's take a look at the Masters balance. This is another way we like to look at the game. Obviously, we want the game to be balanced at all levels if possible. That's our ultimate goal. All the way from the bronze guy who just bought the game, all the way up to the guy who's playing here today in a tournament. We want to do the best we can. But Masters level often tells us, Masters and Grandmasters, often tells us things that we don't see when we look at that big a pool like we just showed you. So Terran versus Zerg, once again, is pretty even. This one seems to be working out for us, and this seems to be historically fairly true for us for many months now. Protoss versus Zerg does have one problem. Zerg dominance, but only if you're European. If you're anywhere else, you're fine. But if you're in Europe and you're playing, against the Zerg as Protoss, you're behind statistically by about 10% on any given day. So that's a little bit of a concern to us. Again, it's hard to know. Masters and Grandmasters is ultimately a pretty small pool, and we see big swings in these numbers depending, honestly, on who logged in on a given day or any changes that happen in the metagame in this matchup. Now, here's the scary one. You ready? Terran versus Protoss. Terran, definitely, but only if you're Korean. If you live in North America or Europe, you're doing okay. But if you live in Korea, you're behind by, again, about 10 to 12 percentage points on any given day. So these would be our two concerns going forward.
So before we get into the tournament data, I just want to point out that we do try to look at every single major tournament out there, and we do take every single major tournament very seriously. We don't just look at one tournament when making a move. So let's take a look at some of the most recent tournaments that happened. All 6 of these tournaments happened, I think, either this month or very close to this month. So it's as recent of a data that you can get as possible. So in GSL Code S, as everyone already knows, Terran is very overpowered. We're seeing a heavy Terran dominance in this tournament specifically. GSL Code A, however, we're not seeing this. We're seeing even matchups for all 3 races. IEM Guangzhou, we're also seeing even numbers, but one thing to know about IEM is while it's a very major tournament, the scale of the tournament is not as big as some of these other tournaments that we're mentioning. So it may be a little biased than some of the other tournaments. IEM New York, we saw that Zerg was dominating. IPL, even though it was a ZVZ finals, we felt like Terrans were competing fairly well against both races, but Protoss weakness definitely stood out in this tournament. And in MLG Orlando, one of our favorite tournaments out of all the tournaments out there, we're seeing even numbers here as well. So now let's take a look at our balance process by taking Protoss versus Terran as an example. So before 1.4, as we pointed out before that on the adjusted rating side, we weren't seeing too many problems except in Europe and Korea at the highest levels. But it's not the only thing we take into consideration when making balanced decisions. We do try to look at community feedback as well as pro feedback very heavily. On the community side, we were getting a lot of feedback saying Protoss is a little too weak against Terrans overall. Pros, however, were going a little stronger in this feedback, and a lot of pros were actually saying Protoss almost has no chance against Terrans, especially versus the 1-1-1 all-in strategy. So what this strategy is it's a strategy of going one barracks, one factory, one starport, opening up that way, and then saving up a lot of Marines, siege tanks, as well as Banshees, and pushing with almost half of your workers also going for an all-in attack. So after doing some more analysis, we realized 1-1-1 is a little too strong and that we should deal with it. We would... And we were also noticing that EMP might be a little too strong as well, but because of the 1-1-1 all-in strategy being too powerful, we noticed it's difficult to really gauge the strength of EMP in the late game because most Protoss players were going into the late game at a bit of a disadvantage because they have to prep against the 1-1-1 strategy every single game by really overbuilding the tier 1 or tier 2 units. So the buff that we chose was a range buff for the Immortal. We went from 5 attack range to 6 in 1.4 patch. And the reason we chose this change was because the Immortal wasn't used heavily outside of the PvP matchup before 1.4. And when choosing changes in general, we do try to go for the smallest change possible. Because we believe the current state of the game is very solid, so we don't really want to make drastic steps that would really flip the matchup in favor of the other race. So after 1.4 came out, after the Immortal change came out, we were noticing a lot of improved feedback from both community and pros. There were still some negative feedback, but for the most part, everything has improved quite a bit. And especially on the pro side, a lot of Protoss pros were saying 1-1-1 isn't a problem anymore, and any equal skill Protoss player should be able to deal with this all-in rush as long as they can prepare for it. We also saw some improved tournament results as well. For example, just last weekend at MLG Orlando, we saw Huck pull off the crazy win. I don't think he even dropped down to the lower brackets, and he just won the whole tournament. And we also saw that in second place was MC, who was also a Protoss player. And while one tournament is not really enough evidence to really show that Protoss is okay now, we believed this small example actually helps us. So on the rating side, we're still unsure, and the reason is because every time we release a patch, it takes the ratings tend to fluctuate a little bit, so it takes time for it to settle down. So after a couple weeks or so, we'll be able to know for sure how the ratings have changed. So currently, we're looking at a lot of these other factors. So just to summarize what we talked about before, on the rating side, we saw that Zerg was a little too strong against Protoss in Europe at the highest levels. We also saw that Terran was a little strong against Protoss in Korea alone. On the tournament side, we saw both Zerg and Terran strengths in some tournaments, but we also saw that Protoss was kind of weak in another tournament. So one of the things that we're trying to do for Protoss versus Terran is we want to reduce the radius of EMP because we believe the pure raw damage caused by EMP against Protoss is a little too strong. So for example, if you hit like 10 units with a single EMP right now, you do 1,000 damage, which is pretty much the strongest burst damage spell you have in the game. We're also looking at a more general Protoss buff so that Protoss in general can be more competitive against the two other races. So on this side, we want to try to decrease the upgrade costs, the Forge upgrade costs for the level 2, level 3, and shield upgrades in general, so that Protoss just gets this just general upgrade.
All right, so that's where we think we're at right now, kind of, with Wings of Liberty. We're obviously exploring a lot of different options of things we can do going forward, and we're really watching this very closely. We have to be very, very careful. These guys that are playing here in the tournament today, the guys that are playing in tournaments all over the world, are giving us feedback that we're close to a happy place for most of these matchups, but at the same time, we're definitely seeing some stuff we want to change, so we're sort of inching up on changes as we go. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about Wings of Liberty design in general, what we're seeing when we're playing Wings of Liberty, when we're watching you guys play Wings of Liberty, and sort of the things that we want to do for Heart of the Swarm based on what we learned from Wings. So there are some core race weaknesses in Wings of Liberty that we're not all that happy with. For example, Zerg really have a problem pushing an advantage in Tier 2. If the Zerg get kind of ahead, their really one solution is to expand. That's really all they've got. And that can go badly for them very quickly if the enemy out-techs them or if they fail to gain enough board control. We have some matchups that are a little bit stale. Zerg versus Zerg is one that's commonly cited to me. I've had other people say it's not the case, but I've also had people say Protoss versus Protoss. So anything we can do to sort of shake up these matchups and try to make them feel a little bit more diverse is something we're going to try to target. And of course, we have some missed opportunities in Wings of Liberty. Some units that we were hopeful for that would do something for us, and right now we just kind of want them to do a little bit more. They're not quite carrying their weight in the game. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to fix the weaknesses, we're going to fix the matchups, and we're going to fix and or replace some units. All right, so one thing I want to remind you guys, this is absolutely work in progress stuff that we're talking about here today. It's work in progress stuff you are seeing out there on the show floor. Nothing is final here today. And as proof of this, I'm going to show you some units that didn't make the cut in Wings of Liberty. This is a Protoss Soul Hunter or Purifier. His name changed a couple of times. It's a full piece of concept art that Sammy did for us. He had a full model in game. He had about a month worth of balance go into him. He didn't make it. He wasn't good enough. We had a Protoss Spore Beast. Again, tons of art, tons of effort, tons of balance, months of work, chopped. Didn't really work out for us in the end. It was kind of a fun unit, not fun enough. And we had a Protoss Adept. He could actually throw that shield there. It was a early tier unit for the Protoss that could engage at range. Too similar to the Marine. Never found mechanics we really wanted to work for it. Despite months of work, it was absolutely cut. So one of the things that we love about coming to BlizzCon is we can get your feedback here. We can get it from you when you come talk to us. We can get it at the stations out there. We can get it on the forums afterwards. This is one of the great things about this convention for us is we can come to a place where we can put our stuff out there before it's quite ready for beta, but we can learn from you what you think is working and not working. I got some good feedback from day 9 last night, actually. It was pretty cool. And beta, of course, will tell us a ton more. Just like every other game we've ever done, we will have a full beta for Heart of the Swarm, which will give us the real deal on how these units are actually going to function in really sort of live competitive play.
So now we'll talk about each race's weaknesses in Wings of Liberty and go into some detail about how we decided to fix these issues in Heart of the Swarm. So let's first start off with Terrans, what issues they're facing in Wings of Liberty and the new units that can hopefully solve those problems. So Thor is supposed to be the best counter to mass mutalisks, but it suffers from two problems. One is the size of the unit is so big that it's easy to get the Thor stuck in between your own buildings and or your units. The second problem is due to the high cost of the unit, you can't reasonably bring out more than 1 or 2 Thors in general against the mass mutalisks, which means if you're ever caught off position, the mutalisks can easily spread out and magic box the Thor to kill them one by one. The second issue that Terrans are facing is the late game mass charge zealot problem. Currently in Wings, the Terran players get around to this problem by using Marines, Marauders, Stimpak, and Kiting heavily in the late game. And while we think this sort of micro is very fun to have for the game, especially in the earlier mid games, we kind of wish in Heart of the Swarm, if the Terrans had an option to switch out into something different that they can deal with just straight up against the Zealots, that might introduce more choices to the Terran players and create more interesting gameplay. Terrans have a lot of options, whether it's harassing enemy bases, defending your own expansions, just spreading out your army into different choke points, or even just having a very solid 200 pop army that can really deal with pretty much anything, any threat out there. So when creating these units, we wanted to make sure that we don't really add to their strengths, but try to find their weaknesses as well as new potential strategies that they can utilize.
All right, so I want to talk about what we're showing here today for the Hellion. So we got a new transformation for the Hellion that lets it go into this battle mode where he's a lot slower and he's a lot tougher. And what this does is it allows the Hellion to withstand a lot of this late game Zealot, Archon attacks that right now they have to kite like crazy to deal with. And maybe more importantly, it really allows them to be an end-game fighter in those scenarios where there's just a lot of splash on the battlefield. If there's a lot of Colossus in play, if there's any number of siege tanks in play, you can bet that your Hellions aren't going to survive that first blast as they close to engage. So the Hellion right now is relegated absolutely to that sort of early to mid-game raider and harasser. And only in very special players can get the ability to make this a really massable unit for end-game battles. So I'm going to show you what this transformation looks like. I think our artist did a pretty good job on it. And now I'm going to show you a little video of these guys in action. Now this video was made just for clarity. This is not how it would look in a real sort of esports encounter, but you'll get the idea. Here you can see the Terran players trying to sort of get away. He's kiting, not real well, but reasonably well against these Zealots. He just can't stand up to this kind of firepower. So we go back up into the base. We're going to get some Hellions in play here. We're cheating a little bit with the choke, but you get the idea. And they'll deploy into their battle form. And now with all this overlapping splash and their additional toughness, these Hellions will be able to withstand this charge and really deal with this kind of Zealot Archon threat. Hellions ordinarily be very unhappy with all the splash damage coming down on their heads from their own siege tanks, let alone from the Archons and the attacks from the Zealots in front of them. But the Battle Hellion, being a lot tougher, can stand up to this kind of firepower and can remain a relevant unit in these kinds of late-game battles. All right, I'll let David talk about the Warhound.
So the Warhound is the new factory unit. It's a mechanical unit. Its main role is the anti-air mass mutalist role like the Thor used to have. And it's a medium-cost, fairly fast-moving mechanical unit. So it's pretty much just a smaller, faster version of the Thor. So it won't suffer from the two Thor problems that we mentioned before. But the main difference of the Warhound compared to the Thor is that it's got an anti-mechanical ground attack, which means if you're fighting against another Terran player who's using mostly factory-based units, this is a very powerful unit to use against that. And also against Protoss, because most of the Protoss ground units are mechanical units, in a straight-up mass situation, I think the only non-mechanical unit Protoss has is the Zealot. So this really allows us to move the Thor up into a different role. And the role that we chose for the Thor was the Limit 1, super high health, high burst damage, really easy to use, attack move friendly unit. So this really allows us to fulfill the fantasy of the Uber unit that the Mothership really couldn't fulfill back in Wings of Liberty. The Mothership had a lot of problems. It was slow moving. It was always the first target to kill because of the cloak ability. And it had a bunch of powerful spells, so if you didn't use those spells, the Mothership was not as powerful as it could be. So we're hoping that this new Thor really caters to that group of players that really want that Uber sort of unit. Yeah. And I'd just like to point out that this unit is definitely under construction, and in our internal playtests, this unit felt pretty strong, especially against Terran and Protoss, and against Mutalisks as well. But we just want to always look for more feedback on this guy. So if you get a chance to go out to the playtest stations and just check it out and give us feedback, that would be greatly appreciated. So in this first video, you'll see the Hellions and Warhounds going up against the more traditional Marine tank army. So the Marines and tanks are spread out pretty well. So the Hellions will go into the new battle mode, which would allow them to withstand the siege tank fire a lot easier, while the Warhounds are picking off the siege tanks using focus fire. They actually have 7 range, so they're pretty good at picking off siege tanks like this. So obviously, if all these siege tanks and Marines were packed up tightly into a choke point, there's no way this Hellion and Warhound army could push that line. But that's exactly what we wanted to go for. We wanted the more traditional Marine and siege tank army to be stronger at tighter chokes with heavily defended chokes, whereas the Hellions and Warhounds have the mobility advantage to fight against that in a different way.
All right, the Shredder. So the Shredder is a new Terran radiation robot. This is kind of a weird unit for us. We're trying some new stuff we've never really tried in the game before with this guy. He's very, very cheap board control. The Terrans have some pretty decent board control with their siege tanks, but it's not very cheap. And if you leave a siege tank off by himself to try to control some part of the map, I'm guessing that's what's going to happen to him pretty quick. And we want something that is not added to the ball of death. This is a term our fans have coined for just a big blob of Marines, Marauders, Medevacs, really almost any group of units in the game. It's got a ton of stuff in it, and you sort of put it in one control group, and you attack, move with it, and you kind of hope. And it's very difficult. Yeah, I've done that many times. So it's very difficult to really know how to control that, and it's kind of a pain for the enemy to figure out how to counter it because he's looking at this big ball of stuff coming at him. So we don't want to add any more to that. And this guy is fundamentally not allowed to be added to the ball of death, and I'll show you why. So these guys can move out, and they can take a little bit of time to set up, and they can create a powerful radiation death field, which gives the Terrans some ferocious board control. That's too bad. Sorry, Nesty. All right. But he has a fundamental weakness. He can't keep his radiation field on near other units that aren't shredders. If other units move into the radius, he'll shut it off so it doesn't hurt them. So in this case, these Marines stim and rush forward, you see the field just shut off. No shredder fire at all. Now, when the Marines get out of the radius, the shredder turns back on. Now, in this case, the shredders got lucky. In reality, most of the time, these shredders get wiped out in these types of scenarios. You need to keep this unit away from the rest of your army, or it is absolutely useless. And so it's very important to manage this guy carefully. So we're hoping this is a way for the Terrans to get that kind of cheaper board control you would see in things like spider mines, but see it in a way that's kind of unique and really forces the Terrans to spread out their army and not clump up on top of these things. So this is where we're at today with the Terrans. We've got the new Battle Hellion, we've got the new Warhound, and we've got this crazy new unit called the Shredder. We're hoping this creates a lot more diversity in play between the Terrans and their opponents, and at the same time gives the Terrans a few more strategic options, hopefully not giving the Terrans too many more options. I know a lot of players feel like they have too many already. But anything we can do to give them a little something without fundamentally destabilizing the game.
So there's a common misconception out there that because this is a Zerg expansion, the name of the expansion is Heart of the Swarm, and we're all wearing Zerg t-shirts, that Zerg will get the strongest units out of all three races. But while this is not necessarily true, they do get some powerful options. So before we get into the actual units, let's talk about some of the weaknesses that they have in Wings of Liberty. So Zerg suffers a little bit from siege challenges, especially in the early and mid-game stages. It's very common for a Terran or a Protoss player to take his natural expansion and really defend that location very heavily, and the only response for the Zerg player is to go for an econ battle by making another hatchery. So we were hoping that in Heart of the Swarm, if there was another option to this, if the Zerg players were able to invest heavily in an army instead of the expansion and just push that line, that might create more potential for Zerg gameplay. Zerg units also suffer from some missed opportunities. The Overseer is a good example of this. You don't really see neither of the spells that the caster has being utilized too often. And this is sort of intentional because the Overseer costs 0 supply, which means you can build as many as you want in any given game, which means if the abilities were kind of powerful, then the Zerg at the 200 pot case would be way too overpowered compared to the other races. The Corruptor, on the other hand, is really effective at what it's supposed to counter. So for example, if you're fighting against a Protoss player, against Colossi, you build, say, like 10 or more Corruptors out, and you kill the 2 Colossus that he has, and the Protoss player, if he decides not to build the Colossus anymore, there's really nothing for the Corruptors to do until the very late game when you can morph into Broodlords.
All right, so I want to talk a little about our new ability for the Ultralisk. The Ultralisk has a little bit of a size problem. He needs to go on a little bit of a diet. He's had this problem for many, many years, and it makes it very difficult for your Ultralisk to get into battle. He gets stuck on your own Zerg units. He gets stuck, of course, on enemy units, and you often lose these guys, or you certainly don't maximize their ability because they're so big. And the Ultra, of course, in Wings of Liberty has been a powerful end-of-game splash unit. We want to kind of buff this a little bit in Heart of the Swarm. Banelings are, of course, mighty enough, and you can use Fungal as well, but both these units have some pretty harsh counters, and we want to find a way, if you really just need to clean up a lot of Marines, you have a way to really do that with a lot of siege tanks already on the battlefield. So we're adding this burrow charge ability on the Ultralisk that allows him to bring the battle right to the heart of the enemy. You're welcome, Nesty.
So the Viper is the new full spellcaster unit. It's got 3 full spells, just like any other spellcaster in the game. So this means that the Overseer is cut, and the Viper will be taking its spot. The main role of the Viper is to break choke points. So in this screenshot here, you'll see Blinding Cloud being cast against a bunch of range units. And what this ability does is it makes it so that every unit underneath the cloud gets their attack range reduced to 1. So other than that spell, we also have other spells that will potentially create new strategies. So in this screenshot, you're seeing Immortals get pulled into the Zerg army so that the Zerg army can easily focus fire and kill them before engaging the Protoss force. So in this video, you'll see Blinding Cloud in action, and the Marines aren't able to kill a single Baneling before they approach and kill everything. Of course, you can micro against this by moving the Marines out of the cloud. So in this second video, you'll see the Colossi being pulled down the ramp so that the Zerglings can engage, and if the Colossus tries to run back up, you can pull him right back down and kill him.
All right, I'm going to talk about a new Zerg artillery unit called the Swarm Host. Now this guy is a great way to gain map control. And what he does is he burrows and he spits out for free a bunch of little timed life units called locusts, which swarm across the map. This is a very Zerg way to have an artillery unit. It's hopefully a very Zergy way to gain a bunch of additional sort of static map control. Obviously, Zerg have a decent amount of map control right now through sheer speed. They can use their Zerglings to threaten your base, makes you keep running back. They can use Mutalisks to threaten your base, keeps you running back. We wanted something they could use to also just kind of fundamentally apply some pressure. Something that would really force the enemy to deal with the Zerg who had some kind of fundamental advantage. I'll show you how these guys work. Here's a bunch of these Swarm Hosts waddling into action here in front of this mighty looking Terran base. They'll just deploy into the ground, set their rally point, and a bunch of these locusts will start swarming into action. All these guys are free. And they're about, what, 90 hit points right now at this point? They do not a great amount of damage, but you can see that bunker's been ripped apart, not only by the locusts, but also by the siege tank firing down on it. Give them a few seconds here, and hey, look what they're going to do. They're going to do it again, and again, and again, and again. It is the endless Zerg swarm knocking at your front door until you figure out a way to deal with it. In this case, these Terrans need to try to run forward and take them out. If there's a bunch of Zerglings behind those Swarm Hosts, that's probably not such a good idea. They may have to back up, and again, the Zerg have gained some board control, some advantage, and they've been allowed to siege that Terran base. It's not as immediately dangerous as a siege tank, because that bunker would be immediately vaporized as the siege tank and so would everything else. But it's the slow, methodical grind of the Zerg. So here's what we got today for the Zerg. We've got the new Ultralisk, which allows them to burrow charge, take the battle right into the middle of the enemy. We've got the new Viper, which has a bunch of new ways to sort of mitigate damage against the swarm, as well as to steal enemy units and pull them right into your stack. And we have the Swarm Host, a new, brutal, methodical type of Zerg artillery that allows you to create, for free, the endless wave of the swarm sort of smashing against the enemy's line.
So a lot of people might argue that the Protoss Ball of Death is a little too strong. So Protoss doesn't really need new units in Heart of the Swarm. But even the mighty Protoss suffers from some issues, and we try to hope to solve these issues through new units. So the first problem that Protoss have in Wings of Liberty is they don't really have a solid, constant raiding option throughout the whole game, especially in the early mid-game. So one thing about the raiding units that we wanted to avoid was pretty much every single raiding unit in Wings of Liberty focuses around how fast you kill workers, how effectively you kill workers. So for this new caster unit, we wanted to make sure that we don't really focus on killing units. At the same time, we wanted this caster to be viable throughout the course of the whole game and a very powerful option throughout the whole game as well. Protoss also suffers a little bit from the lack of AoE anti-air, especially in the late game. So I'm sure all those Protoss players out there have experienced fighting against Zerg, who build, say, like 40 or 50 or even more Mutalisks in the late game, and you really don't know what to build because you don't really have anything against that. The Phoenix are good against small groups of Mutalisks, but if the scale gets that big, there's really not much you can do. So just like the Terrans, Protoss does not suffer from not having options in terms of having that all-round 200 pop supply army. So our direction when creating these new units was, while we could replace some of those units in that ball of death, we didn't really want to increase the effectiveness of that huge stack of army.
All right, I'm going to talk about a new Protoss unit called the Tempest. The Tempest is a new capital ship for the Protoss players. It's a big guy, requires fleet beacon. This does mean, at least for the moment, that the carrier is out. The Tempest is going to take his place. Let's have a moment of silence for the carrier. All right, it's over. All right. He is a very powerful AoE anti-air unit as a flyer, so he's something that can defend your base from mass Mutalisks. And he also can fire against ground units, so he's a decent air assault unit as well. It gives the Protoss a really powerful reason and way to deal with that end-of-game Mutalist scenario that David was talking about. So I'm going to show you a video here, and before I do, I just want to make it clear that sometimes when we balance these things early on, the counters might seem a little sharp. This is probably a little sharp for where it will ultimately end up. That looked perfect. Nothing wrong with that. That's fantastic. All right, and I'm going to turn it over to David to explain the Replicant.
So the Replicant is a new unit after the robotics facility. It's got no attack, and its only one ability allows it to transform into any unit that you have vision of in that game. So you can copy units such as siege tanks or ghosts, stuff like that. But there's a huge downside to this unit, which is the high cost of the unit. It costs 200 minerals, 200 gas, and 4 pop right now, which means if you copy a Templar, then that means you're spending double the cost of the Templar to copy it. But the upside to this is you actually get all the upgrades enabled when you copy a unit. So for example, if you copy a Banshee that doesn't have Cloak enabled, you can actually use the Banshee with Cloak. So we're hoping that because you can copy so many units and bring so many different units to the Protoss army, that this will create a lot of new strategy. Again, this is under construction, and in our playtests, we found that the strength of, say, like a siege tank is different when used in combination with Marines versus when used with a bunch of Zealots, Stalkers, especially force fields on sentries. So we're having slight difficulties in really gauging the strength of this unit, so any feedback would definitely be welcome. So in this video, you'll see a bunch of replicants going in, copying the siege tanks, and all the Marines are killed by the splash damage of the siege tanks. So obviously, this isn't the only use of the replicant. So all those times as the Protoss player, when you felt like those ghosts were a little too strong or those infestors were too strong, you now have an option to copy those units and use it against your opponents.
All right, I'm going to talk about a new Protoss flyer called the Oracle. So the Oracle is a new raiding caster for the Protoss. And he's very worker-friendly. No workers will ever be harmed by an Oracle. There are 55 ways to lose workers in Starcraft 2, but thankfully the Oracle will not be one of them. And he doesn't get added to the Ball of Death. He's not something that we're trying to design to fly over your army and cast a bunch of great spells that you have to use for your army. He's something to be meant to be used alone, by himself, circling around the enemy base, doing all the damage he can possibly do. And the mothership is going to be cut to make room for the mighty Oracle. Let's have a moment of silence for the mothership. Poor mothership. All right, so let's show how this guy works. He's got a couple of abilities he's going to use in this video. One is the ability to temporarily stun buildings. The more important ability is this Entomb ability, which allows him to lock out those minerals. Those minerals cannot be harvested from until those force fields time out or are destroyed by enemy fire. Now, if there was a force that came in here and attacked those force fields, it could quickly wipe it out, and you'd be right back to harvesting, right back to where you were. But if you were to put this over all of those minerals, and there would be no force that would come in to wipe out those force fields, you could lose right now in the balance as much as 500 minerals from this action. But your workers are still good to go. You're not out of the game, you're not done, but your economy most definitely has been raided. So this is where we're at today with the Protoss. The Tempest is coming in to give us some powerful area effect anti-air capabilities. The Replicant is this new wacky technology thief that you can use to copy enemy units. You can have Protoss Ghosts, Protoss Infestors, Protoss Siege Tanks. And we got the Oracle, this powerful Protoss flying raider that you can use in the mid-game to really try to trap the enemy's base by repeatedly raiding his economy again and again and again. All right, you guys ready for the lightning round? We want to get to your questions. And there is a ton more stuff that we're testing in the build today. So I'm going to go through pretty quickly here a bunch of the smaller changes. And by smaller, they don't have a bunch of art associated with them yet, but these could be extremely significant changes to the game. We have a change to the way that Ghost Cloak costs. It now has a fixed cost for a fixed duration. This allows your ghosts to be more easy for you to manage their energy. You don't have to wonder, they're about to run out of energy. You know how much energy they had when you cast the spell. Reapers now regenerate their health out of combat. This means you can attack with your Reapers, and if you don't like how it's going, you can back up, and you can come back a little bit later when they're healed again. The Battlecruiser has a speed boost ability on cooldown. They can go 110% on their reactor and leap into battle to get them closer to the opposition, so they're harder to kite and harder to escape from. The Banelings have an upgrade on the Hive that is a burrow move. The Hydralisks have a speed upgrade on the Hive. The Corruptors have a new ability called Siphon, which allows you to attach to enemy buildings and harvest those buildings for resources. Bizarre, but it might be very, very powerful. The Nexus has a new defensive ability that allows you to turn any building into a sort of a photon cannon for a very short period of time, allowing you to defend against a lot of, who are we kidding, a lot of Terran cheese. And the Nexus has a recall ability. This has a couple of uses. You can use this ability, of course, as a town portal to rush stuff back to defend your base against enemy raids. But you've got Warp in, who are we kidding? You probably don't need that. What this will allow you to do is when you're out on the battlefield with your sentries and your zealots and your stalkers, and things go a little badly for you, right now you have one of two choices. Stay and die, or run, save the stalkers, and leave the zealots and sentries to die. Most likely the sentries. But now with this recall ability, if things go a little badly, you can call your whole force home and save everyone, especially those sentries and zealots, which will hopefully allow our Protoss players to be a lot more aggressive a lot early on in the game. So we've got about 6 new units we're showing here today. Depending how you want to count it, we've got 7+ unit evolutions. We've got a ton of new strategies. And I think now, if you guys are ready, we're about ready for your questions.
Hey guys, my name is Jared. Been playing Starcraft since it came out, and
Nice.
wanted to ask you guys, what direction were you really trying to go with the multiplayer, and what do you think the biggest game-changing unit is going to be?
Well, we're trying to make sure that we get more strategy into the game, as always, and that we get as diverse matchups as is humanly possible for us. We've obviously got a long way to go. This is not something a lot of pro gamers have looked at yet. This is something you guys are seeing for the first time. In terms of stuff I'm most scared of, we can almost just ask around. I don't know, I'm probably most nervous, I suppose, about the Replicant. That's a unit that, Protoss Ghosts, what's that going to do? I have no idea. We've tested it some, and it is a ton of fun, but it could just be horribly broken with no real easy way to fix it. We do have some balance tools we can use. We can always ratchet up the cost. Right now, it's not allowed to target massive units, so there's no sneaky making other guys battle cruisers or whatever. So we can make this a very expensive option. I guess my biggest fear about it would be, if it's too powerful, there might be scenarios where, say, Terran players simply refuse to build siege tanks versus Protoss, not because they don't want to, but because they're afraid they're going to get copied. And that would be a real loss. That would be, sort of units leaving the game now, not entering the game. And our goal is always to make the matches as diverse as possible, to try to create scenarios where all 12 to 14 units are seeing play every chance we get. Did you want to answer which one you thought was scariest?
Yeah, for me, I think the Viper is very scary because the Terran players especially really heavily rely on siege tanks early on for their defense. And if you can really shut that down, that's pretty scary. Same goes for the Protoss. When they bring out, say, like 3 Colossi right now, it's a very powerful threat. But if you pull those 3 and just snipe it with your Hydras or something, that's very powerful as well. So, yeah, I think that's my...
We have some tools on that one as well. Obviously, the cost of those spells can be changed, and those spells can be replaced. The scary thing about the Viper, which I think David is worried about, is the core detection mechanic for the race is now on the Viper. So there's a limit at how expensive he can really be, right? At some point, his detection becomes too far away for the Zerg to really get at. Did I say Protoss? Anyway, too far away for the Zerg to really get at, which means we can't make it too expensive, which means at a certain point, if these spells do get too mighty, they'll need to be nerfed to oblivion, or more likely, changed for stuff that's a little bit simpler, a little less destructive.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
How do you expect Heart of the Swarm to affect the tournament scene? Do you expect all the major tournaments like GSL and MLG to be exclusively Heart of the Swarm, or will there be like Wings of Liberty and Heart of the Swarm? And what do you hope for?
Well, obviously we hope the game get balanced enough, and it's awesome, and it's great, and everyone loves it, and people are switching mid-beta. That would be the fantasy. But the reality is it's up to you guys, what you guys want to play. Wings of Liberty's not going anywhere, right? It's still there. And if the tournaments want to do it day 1, or if they want to do it at the end of year 1, or if they want to do it never, that's absolutely their option. We will totally continue to support Wings of Liberty to the best of our ability. But obviously we hope that we make something good enough that's a better gameplay experience that people want to come over. But if that's not the case, it's all up to you guys. It's all in your court.
Hi, I have a question about the replicator unit, and you said that it'll have all of the tech options or abilities of whatever unit you copy, even if that actual unit didn't have it in the first place. My question is, what happens if you copy an enemy race worker? Will you be able to build their buildings or etc.?
Right now, you can copy workers and build their units. And it's not as scary as it sounds when we try it, but with one exception, I guess, and that's the orbital command, because it's got Mule and Scan, both of which are very powerful abilities. We're seeing a little bit mixed results in terms of this, but I guess what it comes down to is if you guys can just try it out and just give us more detailed feedback, that would definitely help us a lot, because it's not a final unit, and we can make the change to not let it copy workers.
That's an easy fix for us to make, is no workers down the road.
I have one quick secondary question. In one of the videos, there was...
No second question!
I don't like that. Okay, fine. They're
Just
kicking
catch us
out.
afterward, dude. Don't worry about it.
Sure.
Okay, speaking of the replicant, you can duplicate the orbital command.
No, you can duplicate SCV, build a command center, supply depot, barracks, and then build the orbital command.
Okay, so you have to go through the worker first.
Yeah, totally.
Yes.
It's such an early unit that you get access to. It'd be so powerful to have that one. If you work your way up to battle cruisers, I'm not sure how serious that is in a very competitive game, but the orbital command is right there, and it's pretty mighty.
Okay, thanks.
It sounds like the replicant is kind of on everyone's mind. I think the reason for that is you guys talk about making small changes, increasing a range or decreasing. Do you feel like the replicant just opens up this can of worms that is going to be just out of your control depending on how people play with it?
When we talk about making small changes, that's for Wings of Liberty, because we don't really want to change how the game plays throughout just the course of the whole game. But new expansion is an opportunity for us to really add new things, add new strategies, all that stuff. So we want to try to really push strong things into the game. And it's pretty easy to just cut back and remove it if it's needed, stuff like that. So just going forward, we just want to figure out exactly how this functions. But we're not too worried about how strong it is right now at this point.
Yeah, I would say that with even half these changes, we're on a complete do-over on the balance, right? If we need to have this stuff, it's so tight now that if we make a change from range 5 to range 6 on the Immortal, and the pros are saying, hey, we're good, oh my God, right? Like we're so close in that sense. So even any of these new units are gonna, it's a total reason. It's a bunch of work for us. It's a whole new beta. It's the whole new process all over again.
Mix it up, keep it new, huh?
Yeah.
All right.
Back in July on the Battle.net forum, I posted a thread called Warp Prism Shields instead of Health, and what I proposed was switching the shield and health stats on the Warp Prism to give it a reusability factor. It could sustain damage and still be usable. And you guys went ahead and just alt-right buff the shields, which is terrific. And I was wondering if and how that's affected the use of the Warp Prism in the pro circuit.
We definitely tried to get feedback from the forums, and I guess this is one of those things where we listen to you guys' feedback and just buff the unit. And in this case specifically, we wanted to buff it because it was a unit that was almost never seeing play, but we saw a lot of potential in it. So after we buffed it, we were seeing a lot of usage, especially on the pro streams. Maybe not as much in tournaments, even though just last weekend or the week before, I saw one of the Protoss players use it against a Terran player, and it was very effective, I think. So yeah, I mean, like we don't want to see a completely like new thing or whatever, but we just wanted to encourage just this use, and I think we're seeing a lot more usage of this unit, so we're pretty happy with the change that we made.
Thank you.
It is. Hello.
Welcome back.
How you guys doing?
Good.
I was wondering if you guys were concerned at all about having too many options. There's already a lot out there, and you seem to be adding a lot. And probably the majority of these people that play this game are in the lower leagues and don't really understand what's going on right now. And all these options, are you guys concerned about overwhelming other people?
Yes. Wait, all right. So yeah, totally. Obviously, it's always a concern for us that we just have too much in the game. We're looking to add stuff, too, for the more casual players. I think, you know, the changes we're proposing for the Thor would be a good example of this. I don't think that's a unit that's ever going to see play, you know, on the main screen, though it might, on occasion, come out. But it's something that requires right now armory, and it requires, what's the other requirement on that one right now? The Fusion Core, thank you. It also requires the Fusion Core. So it's a very high-end unit, but it's a very easy unit to use. And we felt like the mothership was failing in this respect. It was something that was meant to be for the more casual player to own his buddies in that 4v4, and yet it was something that required a lot of clicks for him to use. It was something that was very vulnerable to enemy fire, ultimately for its cost. So we're trying to do stuff along these lines. But yeah, well, you bring up a fair enough point, right? Like we could totally be in a position right now where we're adding stuff that's a little too complicated, a little too difficult. It might make it even harder, but at the same time, we want to try to add more strategy. So we're going to try to walk the line and see where it takes us.
I'm sure you'll do fine.
We'll
Thank
see.
you.
Hi guys, I had a quick question about spawn larva compared to chrono boost compared to mules. I was wondering if you guys think mules were inherently like imbalanced compared to spawn larva and chrono boost. Like say when a Terran expands to the gold base and drops all their mules at a gold base, do you think it's a little bit too powerful compared to Zerg and Protoss's options?
I guess using it on the gold is a little stronger than the normal, but because it comes in at a mid or late game situation, we don't think it's too problematic. But if it ever gets to the point that we do think that, or if the players think that and we look into it further, then we can always fix that pretty easily, I think. And I think the strength of the mule is not that, but the ability to just save up your mana and use all the mules at once, which like with Spawn Larva you can't really do. And in terms of that, I don't think, it doesn't have to be exactly symmetrical per race, what they get. So Terrans do have it a little easier on that side, but on the flip side, Zerg actually has an easier time, say like producing a bunch of units at once. You can build like 30 units a lot quicker with multiple hatcheries, Haki to 1 Haki, versus trying to build 3 different units out of 3 different building types of the Terran. So we do try to go for those asymmetric options.
Right, but we've heard that feedback, and I'll just take it again as something for us to sort of watch going forward.
Thank you.
Hey guys, Clutch with Major League Gaming here.
Woo!
Starcraft 2 has exploded as an esport. Thank you so much for creating such an amazing game.
Especially at MLG.
Now with Heart of the Swarm coming out, are there any concerns about releasing an expansion to Wings of Liberty during a pro circuit season?
Well, again, our hope is that you guys will make the smart decision and decide when to move over, if you even want to move over. But that you guys will look at it and go, hey, the guy, our pro players, whoever they are, have had a chance to practice and play. They're ready to go. We're going to try a tournament and see how it goes. Or, you know what, these guys aren't ready yet. We're all still enjoying Wings. We're going to hang on to Wings a little bit longer. We went through a little bit of a similar process, obviously, from Starcraft to Brood War, but esports was not, what it is today at that time. So it is sort of forging new ground for us. Can we do this? How should we do it? What should you guys do? I have a lot of confidence in the community at the end of the day to make the right call as to how to show it. Because at the end of the day, yeah, we made a game that's esports friendly, but we didn't make esports. Y'all made esports, right? This was something the community put together and built for us all to enjoy. Seriously, applause to you guys. And so that's why I feel like you guys will make the right call as to when to make that move. But we'll definitely be putting out builds. We'll have a beta up, obviously. We'll be able to get your guys' feedback as to how you want to do it, when you want to do it, and then you guys will make the final call on a tournament-by-tournament basis when and if you want to make that change.
Thank you.
Hello, I just had a quick question. Will the Shredder's attack be nullified around your own workers? Will it be nullified around your allies' units? And will it be repairable?
Yes, it will be turned off by your own workers. Yes, it will be repairable. Yes, if your allies enter the radius, it will shut off. It needs to work entirely alone or with other Shredders. And what you couldn't see in that video, because it wasn't that obvious, is those fields also do not overlap damage. They're like Psystorm in the sense that if you're in a field, you're taking damage. If you're in two fields, you're still taking one set of damage. So you can stack them up, so they're hard to destroy and move through, but at no time do you, if you put 17 together, you do 17x damage. But you do have to use them alone, no matter what.
But it does attack both planes, so it's very powerful in all rounds.
Pretty mighty right now.
My question is about the use of the Shredder as a harassment unit. Because earlier today, a guy dropped the Shredder behind my mineral lines, and then all my workers are gone. I think it would be especially complicated for people that are not very skilled, like myself, because you are not looking at the minimap all the time and you don't have the APM to move all your workers away. So
yeah.
What are your thoughts about that?
I'm sorry. That's a rough first experience, I'll tell you what. Yes, totally concerned. We have some tools we can use to adjust that. Specifically, the deploy time is something we can adjust. We could also try adding some very distinctive sounds to it, so even players who are not able to watch the minimap have some clues this is happening or about to happen. But it could be a deal killer. That could be a reason why this unit down the road simply doesn't have the strength to make it, because, from bronze to gold, that's what you do. You bring in Shredders, you drop them, and you ruin his day. But we'll keep an eye on it going forward. Thanks for playing it, though, for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, well, on that note, I really like what you guys are doing with the Nexus energy, because it seems like in some parts of the game, in certain matchups, and Chrono Boost isn't useless, but it does lose its utility. So on that note, whatever the thing, it's the psi cannons that you put on your building, obviously that's designed to prevent cheese, but what about using it as cheese? It seems like it might be really stupid pseudo cannon rushes.
Maybe not even might be. I watched Day 9 do that to Artosis last night, or was it to JP? I think it was to JP. It was hilarious. Well, no, for me, not so much for JP, I think. Yeah, so totally. Definitely a concern. We've tried it at different tech levels. We just recently made it gateway required. And it could be something that just dies in a fire, that just has too much of a problem. So we've tried it with a limited range. When we had a very limited range, the Protoss were doing all kinds of weird things to keep their buildings in range, and their bases were getting all twisted and weird, and it was very awkward. When we had a very large range, like say a range of 20 on it, they didn't do that anymore. But at the same time, since the range was often off the screen, nobody even knew the thing had a range, which was also not a great new user experience. So the kind of thing, it makes the unit feel complicated and awkward again. So I'm not sure what the right answer on that is at the end of the day, whether there's a range, whether we need to bump up the tech a little bit, or we need to put a bullet into it and say, too bad, that's not going to work. But yeah, right now, if you get some, couple of buildings in your base, you could be in a little bit of trouble right now. Another option we've discussed is making it only cast maybe only on gateways or only on the Nexus or something along those lines. So it's really not something that's easy to drop in the enemy base. But it's totally fair feedback, and we'll definitely keep a watch on it going forward.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for playing.
Hi guys. You mentioned how one of the Thor's weaknesses was Mutalisk's ability to just magic box against them, negating the splash damage. So why is that any different versus the Tempest now?
Oh, I think the Tempest has a much larger splash radius, first of all. And you will hopefully, because they're air units and they're coming in a late stage of the game, you can have multiple of them. When the Thor comes out, you really need, you're in trouble right now, and you might have one, maybe two. That won't be the case with the Tempest. The Tempest is designed to deal with that 30 to 40 to 50 Mutalisk case, so it'll be a very different scenario which he comes into play. Did you want to add to that?
Another huge difference between the two units is that the Thor only really counters Mutalisks, but the Tempest actually counters every air unit in the game, as long as they're grouped up. So even if the other players building Corruptors or other units, they're still really good. So you won't really build one or two of these guys when you build them. I think you would just naturally build more of them because they're more powerful at just wiping out all your overlords or whatever if you win the air-to-air battle.
Well, as with the Thor, if you build too many, you're setting yourself up some other kind of counter, right? That's just going to wreck your day.
Thanks.
We have time for several more questions.
Hi. In the WoW, we really quickly saw a change to AoE to make it the total cap on damage. Will we ever see that in StarCraft? More importantly, with the EMP, just keep the range itself the same, but just have it only be able to take 500 energy total.
I'm not a big fan of that solution for StarCraft. I like what it's trying to accomplish. My concern would be that it would feel very, very random when you do it, what you actually get for it. For example, I EMP a bunch of Zealots and an Immortal. I have something I want to have happen there. I want that Immortal to take a bunch of shield loss. But if it caps at 500 damage and all the Zealots take the hits instead, and I'm sitting there like, why didn't she hit the Immortal? That's what I wanted, right? And so I feel like it's just a little too random for us to really be effective that way. I think ultimately nerfs to the ability, changes to the radius, changes to the range, changes how much damage it does. These are all very effective tools that we can use to attack that ability if we need to do so. That won't really create that kind of scenario where it feels kind of random. You don't really know what's happening.
Plus, what you're suggesting actually has a very similar effect to just nerfing the radius, but it doesn't have that problem. Our solution actually doesn't have that problem, the randomness problem that Dustin mentioned. So I think you'll actually get a similar effect that you're looking for with this change.
We have time for one or two more questions.
Hello again. I have a question regarding the happenstance to what was going to be the Twilight Archon, and now we find ourselves wasting a very valuable High Templar and a more valuable Dark Templar, in my opinion, to get pretty much the same thing. And I think by adding these two units together, which are strong, you would think you would get some sort of a different look to the Archon instead of this uniform blandness that, you get lost by doing it. You might as well just choose two High Templar instead of wasting the Dark Templar.
No, I understand. So if we have ideas for a new Archon, we'll definitely do it. We don't want just another mover and shooter Archon. We've got that guy, right? So if we come along with a new spellcaster or new abilities that would make sense on a kind of a big, tough ground guy, we'll definitely take consider it. And I'll take your feedback on this that, hey, I'd like my Twilight or Dark Archon back. Absolutely.
Hey guys, thanks for the change to EMP. And I wanted to ask about just AoE in general. It feels like mid-late game, because your units clump up so well in SA2, that so much of the strategy revolves around your ability to land and field those good AoEs. And are you happy with that? Do you think AoE is just too good?
Well, I can say one thing, and maybe you can follow up, David. It is one of the biggest challenges we've had ultimately when comparing Brood War to StarCraft 2. We've nerfed things like Psystorm again and again and again in a desperate attempt to deal with this issue, even as the community is like, why are you nerfing Psystorm? And this is the reason why we're doing it. Okay, you guys don't usually talk like that. I'm sorry. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge for us, and it's something we'll continue to look at going forward. It does feel pretty good to watch it on esports, and it can be fun to play, but I hear what you're saying, that maybe it's a little across the line. Did you want to add to that?
I mean, we were getting this feedback a lot, especially towards the beginning when we first released the game. But these days, looking at tournaments, I really don't find game lengths to be too short or anything. I think faster games are pretty good, around 10 to 15 minutes. Longer games, I've seen like 40-minute, 50-minute games too. So in terms of that, I don't think units are dying too fast to splash, and what we have is not too bad.
I'm just going to dogpile you here. Another sort of, from my level of play, right, I'm sort of playing at the low diamond level of play. What you're saying is absolutely true, right? Like, I don't have the ability to easily split my units except on my very best day. Like, if I'm really rocking it and it's a Saturday morning and I'm all fresh, right, then I can split my units effectively. So it's sort of a challenge for us because the pros are able to split their units effectively, and it looks awesome when they do it, and it really puts a lot of skill into the game. But at my level of play, those thigh storms or those fungal growths are pretty critical to the game. So yeah, you're in the same spot, I guess. So yeah, it's a bit of a challenge for us, and it's definitely something I think we'll keep watching going forward.
Okay, thanks, guys.
That is all the time that we have for today. Please give our panelists a round of applause.
Thank you, everybody.
Please join us coming up next for the developer panel stage, Blizzard Publishing. So what's the story?